The homeless teen's life had been a patchwork of cold nights, half-eaten leftovers, and silence that grew heavier with each passing year. He went by Jay, though he wasn't sure if that was his real name or one someone had given him at the shelter years ago. Jay had no family, at least none that he knew of, but he wasn't completely alone. For most of his teenage years, he had a companion in a girl named Arya. She wasn't like the others who came and went from the dilapidated youth center, she stayed. She was different, quiet, yet strangely dignified. She always kept a small golden bracelet tucked under her sleeve, engraved with a letter, A, and a symbol that resembled a family crest. She never spoke much about her past, but one rainy night when Jay was 14 and Arya was 15, she confided something that stuck with him forever. She had once lived in a mansion. She remembered long marble hallways, a woman with red lipstick who smelled like jasmine, and a man who always wore a suit and stared at glowing screens. She said her name used to be Aurora, and her father was a very important man, though she didn't remember his name. Then, one day, there was a loud crash, a fire, and a black car that took her far away. After that, her memories turned into blurs and nightmares. She ended up in the system, bouncing from one foster house to another until she landed in the same shelter as Jay. Jay thought she was making it up at first, fantasies spun by a broken child trying to escape reality. But there were moments when she spoke with such clarity and detail that he knew she had seen a life far beyond the city's underpasses and shelters. Arya wasn't like them. She carried an aura of having been cared for, once, deeply and richly, before being forgotten. Years passed. Arya got sick, the kind of illness that doesn't get noticed when you're living on the streets. No one came to help. One winter, she disappeared. Jay was told she'd died in her sleep, but he didn't believe it. Something in his gut told him she was still alive. She'd always told him, "If I vanish, I'll leave a sign." A week later, the golden bracelet turned up near the river under a broken crate where they used to play. No body, no trace. Jay held onto the bracelet like a relic. He left the shelter system shortly after, surviving by doing odd jobs, hustling, and scavenging, growing tougher and sharper each year. But he never stopped looking. In every missing persons poster, in every news article about missing girls, he searched for her face or her name. Then, one night while huddled under a bridge, he watched a news segment on a massive gala held by a tech billionaire named Victor Langston. Jay recognized the crest printed on the banners of the event, the same one etched into Arya's bracelet. He stared at the screen. The billionaire's voice was calm, dignified, and haunted. He was being interviewed for the 10-year anniversary of his daughter Aurora's death. She had gone missing at the age of 6 and was presumed dead in a boating accident, though her body was never found. Victor spoke about grief, regret, and the emptiness of never knowing what really happened to her. The interview showed a family portrait from years ago. There she was. Jay felt his heart stop. That was Arya, just younger, her hair shorter, but the eyes and quiet elegance were unmistakable. It all snapped into place, the bracelet, the memories, the fragments of stories she had told him. Aurora Langston had survived the accident, had somehow ended up in the foster system, and had become Arya, the girl who had saved Jay from his own loneliness and abandonment. He knew he couldn't just walk up to a billionaire's estate and make wild claims. He'd be thrown out, maybe even arrested. But he couldn't stay silent. He spent days rehearsing what he would say. He cleaned himself up the best he could, used his savings to buy a bus ticket to the city where Langston's company headquarters were. He loitered outside for hours, clutching the bracelet in his pocket like a weapon. Eventually, he was noticed by security. They tried to move him along, but he insisted he had information about Langston's daughter. The bracelet got their attention. Within hours, Jay found himself sitting in a stark, white conference room, opposite a man he had only seen on television, Victor Langston himself. Jay had never felt smaller. Langston didn't speak at first. He just studied the boy in front of him with cold, tired eyes. Jay didn't waste time. He told the story, not with emotion, but with precision. Where they lived, what Arya had said, how she had disappeared, how the bracelet was left as a sign. He described details that only someone who had spent real time with her could know. How she braided her hair to calm down, how she drew birds on every scrap of paper she found, how she used to hum a lullaby that seemed familiar but had no words. Then, Jay pulled the bracelet from his coat and slid it across the table. Langston reached for it slowly, like it was made of glass. The moment his fingers touched it, something in his face cracked. He asked for a moment, then left the room. Jay sat in silence for what felt like hours. When Langston returned, his hands trembled. He asked Jay to repeat the story. Then he asked for the locations, names, and faces of the people Jay had met during that time. A team of investigators was called. DNA testing was ordered. But even before the science confirmed it, Langston knew. The look in Jay's eyes, the devotion, the pain, the desperate need to be believed, was the same look that had haunted his own reflection for 10 years. Jay wasn't lying. Aurora, had survived. Somehow, she had lived. And this homeless boy had been the only soul in the world who knew and remembered her as a real person, not a photo on a mantle. Langston had spent a decade building empires, trying to fill the void of his daughter's loss. But all it took was a street boy with a bracelet and the truth to shake everything he thought he knew about grief, fate, and family. Victor Langston was a man who had everything the world could offer: wealth, influence, global recognition. His face regularly appeared on the covers of business magazines, and his words moved markets. But behind the luxury and prestige was a hollowness he had carried for a decade, a wound that never closed. His daughter, Aurora, had gone missing at the age of 6 during a family vacation on a private island. The official report said it was a boating accident, a tragic misstep in rough waters. Despite a massive search effort that lasted weeks, no body was ever recovered. Eventually, the case went cold, and Aurora was presumed dead. What made it worse for Victor was the knowledge that he hadn't even been there when it happened. That day, he had been on a business call. A potential merger. Something high stakes. Something that couldn't wait. He had promised Aurora he'd join her and her mother for a boat ride later that afternoon, but his meeting had gone long. She went without him. That was the last time he saw her. Not in person, just a glimpse of her through the glass doors of the patio, laughing as she ran toward the dock with her life vest half-clipped and her favorite stuffed animal in hand. She had turned to wave at him. He waved back, phone still pressed to his ear. It was the wave that haunted him. The last one. He'd replayed it 1,000 times in his mind, wishing he had stood up and followed her outside instead. In the aftermath, Victor buried himself in work. At first, it was a way to stay distracted. Then it became a way to punish himself. He believed, in some dark corner of his mind, that if he built enough, gave enough, achieved enough, maybe he could balance out the failure that had taken Aurora from him. His company, Langston Dynamics, grew into one of the largest tech empires in the world. He funded global charities, education programs, and rescue foundations. But it was never about philanthropy. It was survival. Grief had become a part of his identity, and guilt was the silent engine driving everything he did. His relationship with his wife unraveled slowly in the years after Aurora's disappearance. They rarely spoke of their daughter. Not because they didn't care, but because the pain was too massive to fit into words. Eventually, the marriage disintegrated, and she moved overseas. Victor stayed in the city where everything reminded him of Aurora, perhaps because he believed, deep down, that if he left, he'd be giving up on her completely. On the 10-year anniversary of her disappearance, Victor agreed to a televised interview. It was rare for him to speak publicly about anything personal, but he thought maybe it would bring closure, or at least show that he still cared. He spoke softly during the segment, his voice strained but composed. He talked about memory, regret, and the thin line between grief and madness. The interviewer showed a family photo, him, his wife, and Aurora, sitting on the steps of their estate. He hadn't seen that picture in years. It struck him how little he truly remembered about her voice, her scent, her favorite stories. Time had taken more than just her presence, it had stolen the shape of her in his mind. He left the studio that night feeling more empty than ever. The mansion he returned to was cavernous and silent. Her room was still preserved, like a shrine, untouched, but fading. Stuffed animals on the bed. A hand-drawn picture taped to the closet door. He sat on the edge of her mattress and felt, for the first time in a long time, completely powerless. Not even money could touch the dead. So when a young, ragged teen appeared at the gates of his company 2 weeks later asking to speak with him about Aurora, Victor dismissed it immediately as a cruel joke. Over the years, people had come forward with fake leads, scams, and delusions. Some were attention seekers, others just wanted a payday. But the guards insisted this boy was different. He didn't ask for money. He came with a bracelet, one Victor hadn't seen since Aurora was a toddler. A thin gold chain with an A engraved next to the Langston family crest. It had been custom made, and only one existed. Victor agreed to meet the boy, mostly out of curiosity, partly out of habit. He didn't expect much, but from the moment the boy began to speak, something in Victor shifted. The boy, Jay, wasn't selling a story. He was reliving it. Every detail he gave about Aurora's habits, fears, and phrases felt deeply personal. Too precise to be guessed. The way she hummed lullabies but never sang the words. The way she held the bracelet with her left hand and touched it when she was nervous. The way she drew birds in the corners of her notebooks, always in flight, never caged. The shock wasn't immediate, it came slowly, in layers. First, disbelief, then panic, then a trembling sense of hope Victor had trained himself never to feel again. He tried to rationalize. Maybe Jay had found the bracelet somewhere. Maybe he had read old reports or watched interviews. But there were things no report had ever included, like the way Aurora used to whisper to her stuffed animal before bed, or the nonsense words she had invented when she wanted to say, "I love you," without speaking. Victor left the room not because he didn't believe Jay, but because he couldn't stand the feeling of believing. Hope, when you've lived without it for so long, feels like standing on a frozen lake, one wrong move and you fall through. In the solitude of his office, Victor stared at the bracelet in his hand. He remembered the day he had the jeweler make it. Aurora had just learned to write the letter A, and had scribbled it on every wall of the house. He thought the bracelet would be a playful nod to her stubborn pride. She wore it everywhere, refused to take it off, even in the bath. And now here it was, after all these years, in the hands of a homeless teenager who claimed to have known her longer than anyone had since her disappearance. When he returned to Jay, Victor asked for everything: names, locations, events. He requested DNA testing, but even before the science caught up, he felt the tectonic plates of his life shift beneath him. It was like waking up from a decade-long nightmare. If Aurora was alive, if even part of her was still out there, then everything he thought he knew about loss, about grief, about himself, was suddenly open for re-examination. Victor realized he hadn't just lost a daughter 10 years ago, he had lost himself. The man he became was forged in the fires of guilt and sorrow. But now, with this one shocking truth, he had the chance to become something else entirely. Not a billionaire, not a mogul, but a father again, or at least, someone who could try.